Hello, hello.
Hello.
Diamond, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Very well as well. So I'm Phil. I'm the host of the Innovation Blueprint. It's a new venture from Webisoft. I'm a partner at Webisoft, based in Montreal, and we do custom software. So we bring interesting people on to talk about, innovation ideally, but a couple questions around their industries and what they would see as potential optimizations or interesting innovations they would like to share.
Okay,
So maybe you could give a quick introduction to who you are and where you are at your stage of your career.
sure. So I'm Diamond Vinson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations for Majors Management. Majors Management is a fuel distributor, property management company. We own C stores, we lease C stores, and we partner with major oil companies to distribute fuel, as well as partnering with independent operators to provide them an opportunity to run gas stations throughout the country. I oversee all of the dealer operations and our wholesale sales team.
Very cool. How big's the team?
So, we have it's pretty large. We have a company run arm of our company owns C stores, and so when I think about our corporate stores, that's probably like 1,000 because we have about 200 stores, and each one of the stores probably has a good 10 to 15, and then we have the support staff from our marketing team, our category managers, that type of stuff. And then we have, our accounting, billing, about 200 people or so. When it comes to the dealer side of the business, from my team, we try to keep it very lean, about 20 people. And then on my wholesale sales team, it's about 5 people.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't really start as an executive vice president, right? You had an
No.
interesting career path. Can you tell me about that a little bit? How you got to this position?
Yeah, I was a restaurant guy. I went to college to run restaurants. I loved being in food, and but I've always had a knack for sales. When I graduated college from Texas Tech University, Red Raiders, I uh, I was working for Church's Chicken, and
Hmm.
I was worked my way up as a store manager, training manager, district manager for Church's Chicken. And then when my wife graduated from college, we relocated to Dallas, Texas, and I was working for a kind of a pizza chain, and so I was making pizzas. But it was a interesting enough, the pizza company decided that I was making too much money as their training manager, and so they called me into the office one night and told me that they were cutting all of the general managers and train managers salaries in half, but would increase their bonus potential, so it was still pan out to be about the same. But this didn't go over very well with me. I was very upset, and I needed gas, and I was pumping gas after this meeting, very, very upset, just angry, yelling into the wind. And the gas station that I went to had a marketing sign saying, come work for us and make $50,000 a year and paid vacation. It was a really good promotion. And I kept looking at the gas pump as I'm pumping this gas, and I kept looking at the sign. I kept thinking that could be me. I could do that. I could, these guys just cut my salary. They don't appreciate me. And sure enough, I called them. And after a series of interviews, they hired me to work with their independent dealers and bring food concepts into their C stores. And they gave me a market. I did well with that. They gave me another market. I did well with that. Then they gave me a region, and I just kept growing from there. And then, as you build relationships in this industry, you can expand your the span of control and your growth opportunities. And one of the relationships that I created got me connected with a different company, and they brought me in to run a larger region. Then they promoted me to a vice president position, and then I used another connection to come over here to Majors Management. So
Okay. Funny how that works, right?
it
You're
is.
pumping gas, you see a sign.
If they had never cut my salary, I'd probably still be making pizzas to this day.
It's tough to say, right? It's kind of the butterfly effect, right? You
Yes, right.
change one thing, and then sometimes you go back and think, all right, I could have done this differently, but then would my children be the same? Would everything be the same, right?
It's
It's
yeah.
probably not, because like it's really kind of a timing thing, right?
It is, and it's
Uh,
also how you respond to the different highs and lows in life, right? I mean, nothing just happens, right? So there's going to be some type of issues that arise in this world, and you just got to be able to respond.
Especially these days, a lot of
Absolutely,
volatility for some reason.
yes.
Yeah. So, how would you describe like a day for you? Um,
Whew. So I work with primarily with independent dealers. So I'm doing a lot of lease negotiation, contract terms negotiations in terms of how we go to market. I look at, you know, we control the fuel price, the street level for about
Also, you're to blame.
absolutely. We have cost constraints, but we're right there in the middle where we've got to set the profit margins for our side. And, I think that's actually one of the misunderstandings about the general public. The general public perceives every Shell, Chevron, Exxon location as being owned by Shell, Chevron, or Exxon. And generally speaking, that's not the case. Most C stores and gas stations are owned or ran by independent dealers who actually just have like a licensing deal
All
with
right,
the
like a
Shell.
franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say,
Yes,
yeah,
very similar to a franchise, and so they set their gas price to make a certain amount of margin. Now, it's a penny profit business, right? So
yeah. It's a
they're
volume
not
game.
making the $3 or $2 and 69 cents. That's not all coming to them, but they make a couple of pennies over that, and that's what they live off of. And so, back to your original question, I'm checking fuel pricing. I'm checking, making sure that we're aligned with the different markets that we compete in. I'm negotiating leases. I'm out prospecting new tenant candidates. I'm training, developing the area sales managers and the regional directors are on my team, making decisions about whether we should renew someone or we should
Mm.
extend a contract. So it's a pretty all encompassing role.
So, on the topic of gas stations and maybe looking into the future, like how do you see them adapting to more EV car, like more needs for electricity, maybe less for gas over time? Obviously, it's not moving as fast as a lot of people I think thought.
Hmm.
Seems like we're even going back a little bit towards gas.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons we've taken a step backwards, obviously, has been the political climate. Changes in administration, changes in the incentive structure. But the reality is, even if we had been on the same trajectory, it probably would be 50 to 100 years before you really saw a significant market penetration across the country
Mm.
um, relative to EV. The primary issue from my perspective is just it's very cost prohibitive. You know, you can get a gas car a lot cheaper, and when you think about the amount of people, just in terms of wealth, the wealth inequality across, the different, primarily the American United States, but wealth inequality. Uh, there are a lot more people at the lower end driving
Hmm.
cars that can afford an EV vehicle at the high end, right? And so you saw a lot more hybrids coming out. You saw the market moving to that, but even a lot of those hybrids, generally speaking, we're still using a significant amount of gas, and so we've kind of taken a step backwards, I think, with the different administrations from the trajectory we were on. But I still think you're still a long ways away from seeing a significant. Now you go out to certain markets, like out in California, you're going to see a lot more Teslas. Some of your higher end, some of your more populated cities, you see a lot more. EV chargers, but we just don't have the infrastructure in place yet to really make this where it can be more mainstream, right? Uh, we need a lot of work before that's really going to be significant. I think a lot of the early adopters really aren't seeing the significant growth that they thought they were going to see, and so it's there, but for us, for people in the industry, I think we're trying to focus on just kind of the basic C-store convenience. How do we drive, how do we bring food? How do we bring that next niche novelty item into the C-store? We've seen a lot of changes with tobacco. We've seen a lot of changes with the vape or, non-traditional tobacco products that have really been significant movers in the industry, more than I would say the E revolution.
I mean, even hybrids are super expensive, right? So
Absolutely.
probably out of touch for a lot of people.
But as costs, the one thing about life is, as things evolve and as things change, costs will come down, or they will be made in a way where they can be more efficient or more effectively. So that way they won't be as cost prohibitive. And I think you'll start to see more adopters from that perspective when that happens.
Right. So you mentioned earlier, like you'd like to approach or touch on some of the misconceptions in the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's a big headache that you guys have internally, at your operation that you think is just not seen by the public? Like
Hmm.
you wouldn't believe like this is what it takes, to get fuel to this place for
Yeah.
instance.
Uh, you know, so the beautiful thing about our company is we work through independent operators primarily for most of our stores. So I think from our company run locations, the staffing issues are so difficult. I think the general public probably thinks you put up a sign that says now hiring and you've got 20 or so people waiting to come in and look.
That's how they got you though.
Yeah, that is.
So they're like, hey, maybe it'll happen again.
Yeah, we need better marketing materials. But I tell you, we struggle hiring employees, keeping staff. Turnover is significant. I think I hate to sound like an old guy, but there are different work ethics throughout the generations. And I think
Oh,
yeah,
touchy.
yeah,
And obviously, I don't know how old you are, but I just turned 40, right? And
mhm,
so we employ at our company a lot of young people. Obviously, a lot of young engineers that are quite savvy with AI, for instance, right? They come out of
yeah,
school and they already know like how to make magic. And yeah, I could I could get behind that past comment about
yeah. And
different generations thinking differently.
and if they really do think that, but it's more values versus virtues, right? So I don't think I'm not of the mind that like young people don't want to work or they don't know how to work hard. I think they do know how to work hard, but they work hard differently and they have a different value set on personal development or personal growth
That's
or
absolutely true.
even
Yeah.
yeah and I don't discredit that or discount that from being effective to making everyone a well-rounded uh, you know productive member of society. But I think when you think about what it takes in this industry, because a lot of our stores are 24 hours. We open early, we close late. So it's not just a convenient 9 to 5, right? Even someone like me, who I'm not necessarily working in the store ringing up a cash register, but it's not uncommon for me to work, a 16-hour day. I'm working emails, I'm making phone calls late night, I'm writing stores at nighttime. And so helping to bridge that gap to understand what it takes to beat your competition, right? So there's a guy across the street who is willing to stay open later, who is able to, work a longer shift. And there is a dynamic where there is the individual versus the corporate versus the company. And I think previous generations bought more into, I work for this company. This is part of me. They are they represent that company more. And now there's a more individualistic aspect to it where I work for the company, but when I'm off, now it's me time. Not necessarily I represent the company, right? You see that
Yep.
happens when people get in trouble with social media, with their posts and stuff like that.
That's why I'm not on social media.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah, it's gotten out of hand a little bit. You got to be careful what you say, of course.
you do.
And there's no real gain, right? It's really like all to lose and not much to gain. So you know, obviously on the corporate side and on the business side, I do think there's a place for social media, and obviously we're trying to do this at this exact moment, right, with this podcast. But even so, like you got to be careful sometimes how you approach things, and to your point about different generations understanding things differently and working differently, like sometimes they even have like a whole other like different approach of how they see things. And like for instance, we have like an employment contract template that we've had for a decade. No one's ever asked me about some of the clauses in there, right? That are, to my eye, pretty standard. And then this one of our younger guys comes in and is like, what does this mean? Right? Because like I feel threatened by this. Like this sounds like it's not okay. I'm like, what do you mean? Right. And then he explained to me how he perceived it. I was like, oh wow, like I've never even thought of that. And
Yeah.
you're right. Like we could make it more, specific. How do you see automation coming into play so you mentioned, obviously people maybe getting used to 9 to 5, harder to retain employees sometimes because I guess it's not the easiest job, right?
Yes.
And like maybe on the career path, they want to do other things at one point, I guess. And that's the reason why there's a turnover. Do you see, automation taking over at one point with robots, potentially AI?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge role for AI in our industry. I don't necessarily feel that you're going to get a lot of robots I think we've dabbled in self checkout. That's something that, was kind of a fad for a while, people going to self checkout.
Yep. Even
And
the Amazon store that really, at least for me, like being in Canada, I saw the video. I was like, well, this is super cool. Never
yeah,
saw it again.
yeah. And the reality, I think, for that here's my perspective on that. That's going to work great in certain markets, but majority of America doesn't resemble those markets, don't live in those markets. And so it's okay if you have one or two, if you have a little bit of everything. And I think the company I work for, Majors Management, we really strive to be representative of the markets that we are members of, right? So if you think about it, we're in 26 states, hundreds of cities, and each one of those is a local market, and you really have to look at from a unique perspective, what does this individual store, convenience store, need to be convenient to represent the members of that and take care of the members of that community. And so if you've got a community where a non, a C store can exist that doesn't require people, can just, fully automate it, go for it. Great. But I've got some markets where that's definitely not going to work at all. And sometimes, we've got some markets where it's not the nicest or safest area to be around. And so the convenience stores, they resemble that market, and that's okay too. And we find people who are able to compete in those markets and work with the communities in those markets, and they're able to be profitable, and that's what we need.
Right. So you're saying like almost like some of those communities would not respond well to a store being like fully automated. It's almost like a habit of like, having, small talk with the
Yeah,
convenience store clerk or
absolutely.
yeah. So you need that human connection essentially.
Yeah, and not just. I remember, about 10 years ago, I worked for a company, and we were doing some remodels across Houston, Texas, and so we would, completely remodel, paint the interiors, do everything. And I remember, we had like a grand opening event, and someone from the community came in and said, well, this doesn't feel like my store anymore. Right. It was almost too, this is too, there's a word we call bougie, this is too fancy. This is
Lost
too nice.
the
Yeah.
soul of it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, and I'm sure they learned to adapt, and, we were able to retain that customer, but there's a kernel of truth in that sentiment that every C-store operator, every C-store owner should keep in mind as they reflect on what's the next opportunity for their source.
Right. Happens on the company side as well, where you start hiring, delegating some elements to other people, and then you lose what made you successful
Yeah,
sometimes. It's happened to me at a
absolutely.
past company where we try to go corporate a little bit, right? We try to
Right.
hire, HR and then head of, blah, blah, blah. And then those people were not extensions of leadership necessarily, like thought differently, had different, ways of doing things. And then we had departures and that really, really killed the company. So yeah.
Yes. I mean, recently you saw, and it unfortunately it took a more of a political slant, but there's a restaurant called Cracker Barrel, and they tried to rebrand, and they removed, some of the symbols from their original brand, which was, an old guy in a barrel, and kind of went more of a, just the name, it wasn't a very good rebrand. And before it got political, I don't think it would have been very successful regardless. And they decided to go back to the original brand. And, truth be told, maybe that was the original plan anyways.
Just to get a little bit of buzz.
Correct.
Smart. What is something that, it's kind of a legacy way of doing things in your line of business that you think, is outdated and should be changed?
Well, I think an opportunity for the industry in general is we have not used technology to better prepare ourselves from the back office standpoint, understanding where our profitabilities are, understanding what we should be ordering. When I look inside, so I deal with independent dealers, especially. I don't think a lot of our independent dealers really know what their profitability is, right? They generally speaking, they have there's an old saying that there's money in the bank, but there's no money in the pocket, right? So they've got money to cover their bills, but
yeah,
they're really
cash
not.
flow, but no real profits.
That's right. So, and I don't think they understand the nature of their business because they haven't invested enough in the back office program softwares, or even allowing AI to help them better with their ordering or understanding what products they need to bring in, and so they'll take a flyer on some bulk buy down, and then that product sits in their store, right, for 6 to 8 months and doesn't move, and that they've got cash tied up in all this inventory, and rather than letting that cash be used to actually drive revenues in their store. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for us, and probably even on again, I don't deal very often with our corporate stores, but I can see where that would be an opportunity for us as well. It's just understanding using AI to kind of get ahead of whatever that next market trend is going to be, and also getting ahead of when the market trends that we may have bought into are phasing out, right? And so you get stuck with a bunch of Labubu dolls, whatever. I've seen a bunch of gas stations with a bunch of them. Like, what are you doing? Are you selling any of these? And
Who buys these, right? Yeah.
agreed. I'm like, guys,
No, but maybe it's a whole world we're not aware of.
you're probably right. But here's my thing. I think if I go into your convenience store and the fountain machine is down, but you've got a bunch of Labubu dolls, there's a disconnect, right?
Yeah.
So
Priorities are not in the right place.
correct. And I think there's an opportunity there, because sometimes if you haven't fixed your fountain for 6 months and then you're like, well, I don't sell a lot of fountain, it's because the fountain machine is broken. let's fix it.
Yeah.
Let's get it working right. Or you don't sell. You go into you want a hot dog, right? And you got one hot dog on the roller grill and it's burnt. Look, you're never going to sell any hot dogs like that. So trying to help people understand that, and I think AI is really going to be a future, but also marketing. Right? There's a bunch of apps. There's a bunch of loyalty opportunities. I think those are really where the future for the industry that I'm in. We can really use technology to our advantage to drive, the business.
So how much do you drive those decisions actually? So let's say, obviously you see all those areas that are ripe for optimization.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recommend, software updates or hey, you should really look into investing in this, for instance?
Yeah.
Hey, we found this app that exists that's a business intelligence dashboard that will leverage your data and then obviously give you like sales insights and so on. Like, does that come from you or does that come from like the shells and the...
So it comes from both, right? So number one, when we are primarily, my company is partnered with almost every one of the major oil companies. So we've got Shell, we've got Chevron, we've got Exxon, Valero, you name it, we got it. And each one of those major oil companies has their own, built-in traditional marketing program. From the forecourt to the backcourt, there are certain elements that you have to maintain as part of your commitment to that oil company. But how you leverage those built-in programs really can, decide if make you successful or not. For instance, let me give you an example. So, Shell has a loyalty program, right? And they've got signs and stickers at the pump. They got signs in the window. They've got brochures inside the C store. But that word of mouth suggestive selling by the cashier is significantly more effective in promoting that program than anything else would be, right? And that's why you see them also invest heavily in radio, TV, ads, those type of things, because it's physically someone telling them, "Hey, check this out." But I think for us, as we encourage our independent dealers to really buy into the programs, participate themselves, you'd be surprised how many people are in this industry aren't members of the programs themselves. So they're not seeing the impact, right? So they
Yeah.
don't know what that app alert just came out, right? But the people who are, then they can help share that knowledge. And it's like a little village. You can spread pretty quickly if everyone's participating. So from my perspective, we're focused on encouraging our independent dealers to understand the programs for themselves, make sure they're members, make sure they're participating, but also incentivizing their cashiers, their people who run the registers to help promote them. Now, as I am, people on my team go out and, we go to different trade show events, we go to different industry events, or we're out in the market and we see stuff. Maybe we're out looking at competition and we see something that our competitors have that, seems unique or cool or something. Obviously, I can definitely engage with those individual vendors and introduce them to, hey, let's try this at this store. Talk to one of our independent dealers to see if they want to try it out, right? And we've done several test cases with different programs from that perspective.
Very cool. Have you ever encountered a major problem that you were the only one, to see, or no one else, saw that huge issue, and then you're like, "Hey guys, like we need to fix this."
I can't think of like a major problem that I was the only one to solve. I'm not really like the guy who invents like the new system or anything,
Hmm.
but I'm the guy who will tweak something that already exists. Like, hey,
Okay.
this is
Yeah.
not very effective. This is not very efficient, right? And we need to create an SOP that we can use across the chain. When I think about the company I work for, like I mentioned earlier, we're in 26 states. We're in vastly different markets. But my job is to make sure that we're very standardized in how my regional directors, you know, work with their area sales managers, and the area sales managers work with their independent dealers, so that we're not doing something completely, different in Michigan that they would be doing in Louisiana, right? They should be doing the same. They should be doing the same walks, the same, how they look at the store. When I first came, I wanted to make sure that there's the saying, like the forest before the trees, and
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that when I step on the lot, on the lot of a gas station, that my regional directors and my area sales managers and the independent dealers all look at that C store the exact same way, right? So and hopefully it's from the perspective of the end consumer, right? So that way, when you go to this corner, you look at your C store, you see the same issues that need to be addressed. Because if I'm looking at it like this and you guys looking at it like that, we're not looking at the same thing. We can't address the same issues, right? So once we standardize our vision, that we're looking at the same things, then we can try to standardize our approach to addressing those things, so that way we're talking the same way, right? So that way there's not miscommunication or a mixed message, right? The message is the same, whether it be, hey, dirty pumps are unacceptable. You've got to get this clean. You've got to address this. But if you can't even see the dirt, that's the first problem. Like, hey,
Yeah.
you got to this is dirty, right? Dirty is dirty, right? We got to be able to make sure everyone understands what dirty versus clean is relative to that perspective, right? Now, once everyone can see the dirt, how do we clean the dirt, right? And so now it becomes a method of, does this person understand how to clean it and they're just choosing not to, or maybe they don't understand, how to clean it, and that's a training, right? I can train how to do something, but I can't give you the will or the desire to address something that's impacting your customers, right? And if I have people on my team who are unable or unwilling, I should say, to address those critical components of the industry, then they probably shouldn't be on my team.
So we got to get the definitions right before
Correct.
yeah. In my line of work, it's the same, by the way, in tech, because if like part of a scope, means one thing to one side,
Yeah,
and so we ran into that a couple of times.
I
We're
believe
better at it now. You touched on it a little bit before recording started with the podcast invites.
it.
Where do you feel, people are trying to sell to you, let's say, like vendors? Where do they miss the mark? Like this is not at all what I need,
You
right?
know, so I think with vendors, part of the problem is almost like, for instance, you get a request to connect on LinkedIn. You almost don't even want to connect, because as soon as you hit that
No,
check,
there's going to be a big spam thing. Yeah.
correct. And so it's not genuine. It's not a
Mhm.
genuine connection, right? And I think the way the difference is how do you create that genuine connection? You create that genuine connection, you're going to get the meeting. You're going to get the opportunity to at least pitch your program or your products, right? And my thinking is, when I was in college, I used to sell clothes, and
Okay.
right, and so people would come into the store, and we would have, we would train on these transitional statements, right, to kind of create that little bit of a relationship from the jump, so it's not just hi, or you guys just looking, right? That's everyone's just looking. That's why they're there, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
You don't
hey,
walk on the lot unless you want to buy, right? From
yeah, that's right. It's like,
Glengarry. Yeah.
hey, I love that shirt you have. It goes really, really well with something like this. And you have it in your hand, that product, right? And like, understanding who they are, like, hey, where are you from? I feel like I recognize from somewhere. You create that 30 seconds of engagement, and then now all of a sudden their guardrails are down, right? And you've got an opportunity to show them something, and let the product, if the product is good, it's going to sell itself. You don't necessarily need to be a strong sales guy to be pushy, right? You just need to get past that initial guardrail and allow the product again to sell itself. And I think with, when it comes to like you were talking about from the beginning, I think there's a missed opportunity because they email, it comes across like a spam, it doesn't look genuine, so I just delete it. The LinkedIn requests come across, as a spam. I never
And
even
then
read
it's
them.
like business development at, yeah,
Correct. Right. So I think, if you can find a way to be more unique and more genuine in the approach to creating that, again, 30 seconds of relationship, right? The guardrails will come down. People will allow you to, push your product, over a hot second. And then if the product is good, it takes care of itself. Now, if you got a crappy product, you're going to have to push it hard.
that's right. Yeah, well said. And I think, in this age also, the old outreach, cold outreach way of doing things now gets mixed up with AI, right? You don't know who's real, who's a bot.
That's a
Like,
good one.
and so like it was, I think it was hard before. It's even harder now. And it's going to go away. Like, I don't think it's coming back. And so you need new ways of doing it. The way that, for us, for instance, our conclusion is content, right? So more people need to know about us. And let's get out there, let's get more brand awareness, which is partly what this podcast is for, essentially get, our name out and the brand awareness out. And then if, like you said, people enjoy it, people like the content, people, will look into it. If they like the product, they buy it. If not, yeah, move
That's
on.
right.
But yeah, like I think Mark Cuban said, like, that's one theory, of where we're going with AI, but there's almost going to be a resurgence of people wanting in person, right? Because everything's, virtual, everything might be fake. You're talking to, am I even real, right? I might be a Sora 2 AI agent.
That's
And
right.
so people will want to go back to in-person meetings, relationships, almost low tech, I could see that. I could see that happening.
I could see that as well. I could definitely say. Again, for me, it's all about the genuineness, right? If it comes across as very genuine, as real, you got a higher likelihood that that's going to be more successful.
Totally agree. What do you see in your industry? So on that, what do you think is going to be a real innovation, like in the next 5 years?
You know, I don't know about a specific innovation in itself. I think we're going to see AI incorporated more to make it where some of these people in the industry, some of the companies, the larger companies, especially because they have the capital to invest in certain technologies, but uh, can move quicker and can respond faster to the changes in the industry. And I think data analytics really will be a driving force and allow the larger companies to do things that the smaller companies can't compete. And there's already in our industry significant market consolidation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
smaller C store chains get purchased by larger C store chains. And, recently, even in Canada, you get impacted by larger, chains getting bought by mega chains, and so I think that nature of this industry will force companies to adapt and to modify. And I think we'll see the innovation is going to be those who can use technology to, either block or tackle or have a better offense, whether
Is
it
that a
be
football analogy?
it
It sounds
is.
like it is.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah. Blocking, sometimes when you're competing, you just need to block, right?
Right.
And sometimes you need to tackle and put them down to the ground. But sometimes you got to have a more of a offensive mindset, and so I always things happen, and I talk to our independent dealers, and they always want to talk about, hey, this happened in this area, and we've got to look at the rent. We've got to adjust.
Hmm.
My deal, that they would say, and I'm like, okay, well, let's look and see, and there might be a real issue in that happen, but what have you done to respond to that real issue, right? Have you just put your hands in the air and say, I'm not going to do anything different, and expect, and that puts, again, when you do that, when you put your hands there and do nothing different, then someone else has to do something different, meaning me,
Yeah.
to adjust,
Probably. Yeah.
yeah, to adjust the
Yeah.
economic model to be better suited for you. But you also have some people like, hey, this happened, so here's what I've done to be more competitive, right?
Hmm.
Here's what I've done to attract this other customer base that I hadn't really tapped into, and I would be a lot more amenable to reviewing the economic model that we've established for this site for the guy who's done something, who's willing to compete, willing to fight for the business, than the guy who just puts his hands in the air and expects me to solve his problem.
Well, he knows you're gonna do it. Maybe. It's
He'd
like my
be,
wife. Sometimes, she has to do
yeah,
something, and she just waits, and then I do it, and then
yeah.
it gets done.
Uh, he'd be hard
Smart,
pressed.
clever, clever, clever. What keeps you up at night, business wise? You know.
Business wise, I think I get nervous about, and what keeps me up is we struggle to find capable tenants for certain markets,
Mm.
right? And our model requires that we run these stores through independent dealers. Traditionally, these independent dealers, are people maybe first generation, second generation, from certain demographic areas, and I worry that we are unable to find, the best candidates. I worry that we're going to have sites where they're just no longer attractive to, our independent dealers, and that puts some constraints on, my profitability, puts some constraints on how we go to market, and that's my biggest, call for concern.
Do you think it's gonna get easier or harder over time?
Definitely going to get harder. Definitely are. And, part of the difficulty are, again, we talked about earlier that there have been changes in the political administrations, but even on the local level, the state level, those changes are actually more impactful, right?
Yeah.
Whether they've
Yeah.
changed the laws around vape or THC, these are all different markets. Our independent dealers were, had dipped into to find additional revenue streams. And we've seen that when those are abruptly, or even, they're given notice to, you can no longer, sell these type of products. And I'm not criticizing the thought process that went into why they don't want those products sold. What I'm saying is it changes the dynamics of of how those independent dealers can be profitable, right? And then it hurts the industry.
Also, like, especially at that scale where you said, like, basically you're making micro profits on every transaction, right?
Correct.
So
Any profit
anything,
business? Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, it could affect, it's an immediate effect essentially. If something like you're used to doing something, and then all of a sudden that thing's no longer available.
Yes.
So how do they adapt to that? Like, how long does it take to recover?
Um, well, a lot of these changes, again, really have started, as of January, or, the last, couple of different legislative sessions. And so it could take a couple of years
Take a
to
couple of years,
really,
and then there's another administration, and it changes again. So you're always on your toes.
you have to be. You've got to be
Yeah.
adaptable. And we'll adapt to that, these latest rounds of changes. It's primarily like Texas had some huge changes. Louisiana has some recent changes, Alabama and Florida. So those are all great markets for the C-store industry.
Diamond, we're coming up on time. Do you have any parting words? Last shout out? Anything you want to get out there?
Listen, I thank you for this opportunity. I've already shouted out my Texas Tech Red Raiders. I've already,
No
you know,
hockey team for you?
huh?
The Stars, maybe? No hockey team?
I like hockey, but I like hockey in person more than I do watching on TV. I'm not a
Okay,
huge baseball
fair.
fan. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, so really I'm in mourning. This whole last 20 years of my life have been just watching my Cowboys just struggle. But that's about it.